This is Pamela, and you are listening to Watchmen on the Pod. All right, we're going to pick back up in our book reading, The Holy War, made by Shaddai upon Diablos for the regaining of the metropolis of the world. John Bunyan is also the author of The Pilgrim's Progress. If you've never read it or heard it or seen the movie, I suggest you do. I think the book would be best, but that's just my opinion. Okay, Chapter 21, Diablos' Plan. All right, I gotta fix my glasses. Now, you may remember I told you that after Emmanuel had taken man's soul and rebuilt the town, many of the old Diablins remained lurking about in several places. Some of them had arrived with the tyrant when he invaded and took over the town, while others were the result of illegal relationships resulting in unlawful breeding and births. The holes and dens where they lurked were in, under, and around the wall of the town. Some of the names of these diablins are Lord Fornication, Lord Adultery, Lord Murder, Lord Anger, Lord Lasciviousness, Lord Deceit, Lord Evil Eye, Lord Blasphemy, and that the horrible villain, the old and dangerous Lord Covetedness. Now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, inimites, intimates, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I have forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Galatians chapter 5, 19 through 21. These, as I told you, still resided in the town of Mansoul, even after Emmanuel had driven their prince Diablos out of the castle. The good prince had given Lord Wilby-Will and the whole town of Mansoul in order to seek, take, secure, and destroy these and all other Diablins that they could lay hands on, because by nature they were enemies of the prince. In fact, they were among the very ones who sought to ruin the blessed town of Mansoul. However, the town didn't pursue this warrant. They neglected to follow the order and didn't work at apprehending, securing, or destroying these diablins. Therefore, these villains took courage and little by little poked their heads out from their hiding places. They gradually showed themselves to the inhabitants of the town, and as I was told, some of the men of Mansoul grew too familiar with some of them, to the detriment of the town. When these Diablin lords who were left in the town realized Mansoul's sinning had offended Emmanuel their prince, and he had withdrawn from them and was gone, they plotted the ruin of Mansoul. So at a set time they met at the den of Mr. Mischief, who was also a Diablin. These are the men who devise iniquity and give evil advice in this city. Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 2b. They talked about how they might deliver man's soul into the hands of Diabolos again. As the discussion progressed, some advised one way and some another, with another man offering an opinion according to his own liking. Lord Lasciviousness proposed an idea suggesting it might be best for some of the Diablins in Mansoul to offer themselves as servants to some of the natives of the town. He said, for if they do this and Mansoul accepts them, they may make the taking of the town easier than it would be otherwise for us and for Diablos, our Lord. But Lord Murder stood to present his own thoughts on the subject. This might not work at this time, because Mansoul is currently eager to reconcile herself to her Lord again, because of what happened with our friend Carnal Security. The town was seduced by deceit once already and made to offend her prince. How shall she reconcile herself except by the heads of these men? We know they have an order to capture and slay us wherever they find us. Therefore, let's be wise as foxes. If we are dead, we can't hurt them, but while we live, we may bring them harm. So once they had tossed the matter back and forth for a time, they agreed a letter should be sent to Diablos in their name. They would explain the current state of the town of Mansell and how it had fallen under the displeasure of their prince. We can also let him know our intentions and ask his advice to see how we should proceed. So a letter was drafted, and this is what it said. To our great lord, the Prince Diablos, we dwell below in the infernal cave. Our great father and mighty Prince Diablos, we, the true Diablins, who still remain in the rebellious town of Mansol, having received our existence from you and our nourishment from your hands, cannot sit back and endure watching without doing anything, as you are blamed, disgraced, and criticized by the inhabitants of this town, and your long absence is to our disadvantage. The reason we are writing to our Lord is that we have hope this town may be inhabited by you once again. Mansol was waned from its relationship with Prince Emmanuel so much that he has departed from them. And even though they have sent petitions over and over again asking him to return, until now, their petitions have accomplished nothing. At this point, they haven't received a single good word from him. They cried for help, but there was none to say, even to the Lord, but he did not answer them. Psalm 18:41. Recently, a great sickness and fainting has spread among them and continues even now. This sickness isn't limited to the poor of the town, but has even befallen the lords, captains, and important nobility. We who are Diablins by nature remain well, lively, and strong. So we are writing to let you know man's soul lies vulnerable to your power as a result of their transgression against Shaddai's law. We believe now is the time for you to act. Your cunning, combined with the sly craftiness of the rest of the princes with you, makes it the perfect opportunity to attempt to take man's soul again. We await your word in this matter, and in the meantime we shall do all within our power to be ready to deliver it into your hand. If you don't think that what we have said meets with what you believe is the best course of action, send us your thoughts in a few words. We are all ready to follow your counsel, even if it puts our lives in peril or costs us whatever else we possess. This petition is imparted by our hands on the day and date written above. It was drawn up after close consultation at the house of Mr. Mischief, who is still alive and keeps his residence in our desirable town of Mansell. The Diablins chose Mr. Profane to carry this message. When he arrived with the letter at Hellgate Hill, he knocked at the brass gate and awaited entrance. Cerberus, the monstrous hound of Hades that served as the porter and keeper of that gate, opened to him. Profane stepped through the gate with the letter from the Diablins who lived in Mansell and presented it to Diablos, his lord. Greetings, my lord, from Mansell, Profane said as he delivered the letter into Diablos' hand. This letter is from our trusted friends in Mansell. A rowdy crowd made up of scoundrels gathered from the dens of Beelzebub, Lucifer, and Apollyon to hear the news from Mansell. The letter was opened and read while Cerberus stood by. When the letter had been read in the hearing of those present, news of what it said spread into all the corners of the den, and a command was given that the dead man's bell should be rung in celebration. So the bell rang out, and the princes rejoiced that Mansell was likely to come to ruin. Now, the clapper of the bell rang this out: the town of Mansell is coming to dwell with us. Make room for the town of Mansell. This bell rang out this message non-stop, and they all hoped to have Mansell again. When they completed this horrible celebration, they came together to figure out how to answer their friends in Mansell. Some advised one thing and some another. Finally, because the business required a swift response, and they judged Diablos, the Lord, most particularly suited I said that wrong. And they judged Diablos, the Lord, most particularly suited for making this choice. They left the whole decision to their prince. So he drew up a letter as he thought fit and sent his response by hand of the same Mr. Profane to the Diablins who lived in Mansoul. This is what it said. To our offspring, the high and mighty Diablins, who still live in the town of Mansoul, Diablos, the great prince of Mansoul, wishes a prosperous outcome to the many brave enterprises, conspiracies, and plans you have in your hearts to perform against Mansoul because of your love and respect for our honor. Beloved children and disciples, my Lord Fornication, Lord Adultery, and the rest, we received and welcomed your letter, delivered by the hand of our trusted Mr. Profane, here in our desolate den. It is with utmost joy and satisfaction that we read your message and in response ring our bell with gladness. In fact, we rejoiced as much as we could when we realized we still had friends in Mansoul who sought our honor and revenge in the ruin of the town of Mansoul. We rejoice to hear Mansoul is in a fallen condition and that they have offended their prince. He is gone. Their sickness pleases us, and we are delighted to hear of your health, might, and strength. We cannot put into words how glad we would be to get this town into our clutches again, and we shall not spare our cleverness, cunning, craft, or hellish ingenuity in order to bring about our desired conclusion. And consider these comforting words, dear offspring. We shall again surprise Mansoul and take it. We will attempt to put all your enemies to the sword and will promote you to be the great lords and captains of the place. If we take Mansoul again, you will no longer need to fear being cast out ever again. For this time we will come with more strength and hold fast and control more than we did the first time. It is the law of that it is the law of that Prince Emmanuel to whom they claim to belong, that if we conquer them a second time, then they shall be ours forever. We ask that you, our trusted Diablins, attempt to weaken Mansoul more and more, pry into their everyday dealings, endeavor to spy out their weaknesses. Then send us word about what you find and how you think we have the best chance to recover the town, whether by permission to live a vain and loose life, by tempting them to doubt and despair, or by blowing up the town with the gunpowder of pride and self-conceit. My brave Diablins, and true sons of the pit, be ready to make a hideous assault from within Mansoul at the time when we are ready to storm Mansoul from outside the walls. Make haste in your preparations. In our interest to possess Mansoul, we will tap into the maximum power of the gates of Hades. Your great Diabolos, Mansoul's enemy, and he who trembles when he thinks of judgment this closes this letter, wishing all the blessings of the pit be upon you. This letter is given by the mutual consent of all the princes of darkness at the pit's mouth, to be sent by the hand of Mr. Profane to the remaining force and power still in Mansoul from me, Diablos. This letter was sent from the dark dungeon of Diablos to the Diablins, who still lived in Mansoul and inhabited the wall. It was delivered by the hand of Profane, and when he returned to Mansoul, he went straight to the house of Mr. Mischief, as this was the place where the schemers met. It was here the conclave awaited his arrival. When they saw their messenger approach the house safe and sound, they were filled with gladness. Then he presented them with the letter he carried from Diablos. They opened it eagerly and read it. The contents boosted their morale and filled them with delight. They asked about the welfare of their Lord Diablos, Lucifer, and Beelzebub. They asked how the rest of their friends from the den fared. Mr. Profane stood tall and proud, quite enjoying all the attention his role in the plan provided. He said, "Well, my lords, they are well, at least as well as can be expected in that place." His thin lips stretched into a smile that looked more like a sneer. "They rang the bell for joy after reading of your letter." Profane pointed to the open letter in their hands, as you can see by this letter. "And it is true, when they read their letter, it encouraged them to their work, and they plotted a Diabloin strategy for how they might complete their plan against Mansoul." "Don't let it be known," one said. The others agreed. "Yes, we need to be sure Mansoul is not informed regarding the plans we have against it." So the first thing they agreed upon was to keep all the plans as hidden as possible from Mansoul. Then they discussed what tactics they should use to bring about the ruin and overthrow of Mansoul. Again, each had his own opinion, but Mr. Deceit stood up and said, "My just Diablin friends, if we Look to the letter we have received. Our lords and the high ones of the deep dungeon have proposed 3 ways by which we may accomplish this task. First, we need to decide if it is best for us to seek its ruin by making man's soul careless and vain. The second option they offered was to drive man's soul to doubt and despair. And the third was to endeavor to blow it up by the gunpowder of pride and self-conceit. Deceit hooked his thumbs around the straps holding up his trousers and rocked back and forth from heel to toe. Now, if we tempt them to pride, that may accomplish something. Through insolence comes nothing but strife. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 10a. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. And if we tempt them to excessive indulgence because of their freedom and instill contempt against the restraints of the law regarding morality and good behavior, that may help. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. James 1:14. But in my mind, he stopped rocking and placed his long fingers flat on the table around which they sat. He looked at each of the diablins and said, if we could drive them into desperation, that would hit the nail on the head, for that would cause them to question the truth of the love of the heart of the prince towards them. His thin lips stretched into a toothy smile, and that will disgust him. If it works as well as I think it will, it shall put a stop to those petitions they are sending to him. Say goodbye to their earnest request for help and supplies. Deceit straightened and hooked his thumbs about the straps again. The natural conclusion will be to do nothing, for in their eyes it shall serve no purpose. All the diablins nodded and gave their unanimous consent to Deceit's plan. As excited as they were with this plan, it still raised the question of how they could bring it to pass. Deceit rubbed his hands together and said, this might be the best way to do it. He leaned in close and everyone drew near to listen carefully. Let all of our friends who are willing to risk their lives for promoting this cause disguise themselves. Let them alter how they dress, change their names, and visit the market, pretending to be from a far-off country. While in the marketplace, let them offer themselves as servants to the famous town of Mansell. Oh, it sounds like, over there in Joshua and stuff, remember? All right. Once they are accepted in this role, let them pretend to help and support their masters. But once man's soul hires them, they can corrupt and defile the entire town a little at a time. And this will further offend her prince, and he shall spew them out of his mouth. But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds will be led astray by the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. It's the simplicity, guys, the simplicity. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. And when this is done, they'll become easy prey for our prince Diablos. Deceit nodded with glee, and others agreed. Yes, they shall fall into the mouth of the buyer. The specifics of this plan were no sooner proposed than they became accepted by all the diablins who were ready to engage in this subtle venture. However, they decided it wasn't a task fit for all to take part in. Therefore, they chose 3. Lord Covetousness, Lord Lasciviousness, and Lord Anger. Lord Covetousness called himself by the name of Prudent Thrifty. Lord Lasciviousness called himself Harmless Mirth. And Lord Anger called himself Good Zeal. On market day, these 3 impudent fellows came into the marketplace dressed in sheep's clothing, which was as white as the white robes of the men of Mansell. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Matthew 7:15. These men could speak the language of Mansell well, and when they arrived in the marketplace, they offered to lease their services to the townsmen. In a short time, their offers were accepted because they asked for low wages and promised to do their masters great service. Mr. Mind hired Prudent Thrifty, Covetousness, and Mr. Godly Fear hired Good Zeal, Anger, while Harmless Mirth, Lasciviousness, had a little more trouble being hired because of the town of Mansell was observing Lent. However, when Lent was almost over, the Lord Wilbewill hired Harmless Mirth to wait on him as his personal servant and lackey. So all three villains now had masters. The plan progressed when they were invited into the houses of the men of Mansoul. They wasted no time to execute great harm within their homes, for they were morally impure, cunning, and artfully resourceful in performing the things secretly. As a result, they quickly corrupted the families and their masters as well, especially prudent Thrifty, the one they called harmless mirth, and the one they called harmless mirth. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 6 through 7. However, the Lord Anger, who went under the mask of good zeal, wasn't as well liked by his master, for godly fear recognized he was nothing but a counterfeit rogue. When Lord Anger realized he was found out, he escaped from the house. If he hadn't, I don't doubt his master would have hanged him. Up to this point, these vagabonds carried on with their scheme and corrupted the town as much as they could on their own, and wondered when their Prince Diablos would attempt to seize Mansoul. They all agreed a market day would be best for that effort, because the townsfolk would be distracted with their business. You see, the rule of thumb says when people are most busy in the world, they least fear the unexpected. They reasoned, if we take action on a market day such as this, we'll be able to lay the groundwork for our friends and lords with less suspicion. And if they do happen to notice what we're doing and we are forced to retreat, it'll be easier to hide in the crowd and make our escape. Once they agreed on these things, they wrote another letter to Diablos and sent it by the hand of Mr. Profane. That read, and this is what it said. From the lords of looseness to the great and high Diablos, from our dens, caves, holes, and strongholds in and about the wall of the town of Mansoul. Greetings. Our great Lord and nourisher of our lives, Diablos. How glad we were when we heard that you, our Father, are ready to carry our plan forward with us in our attempt to ruin man's soul. No one can tell except those who set themselves against all appearances of good as we do when and wherever we find it. Concerning the encouragement your greatness was pleased to give us to devise, contrive, and fix our minds upon the complete desolation of man's soul, let us say we are not anxious about it. We know it can be nothing but pleasing and advantageous for us to see our enemies and those who seek our lives die at our feet or flee before us. We continue to scheme and deceive our enemy to the best of our ability to make this work easy and accomplish it for our lordship and for us. First, we consider the hellishly cunning threefold project you proposed to us in your last communication. We decided blowing up with the gunpowder of pride would do well, and tempting them to be loose and vain would work quite effectively. However, we think the best approach is to bring them into a gulf of hopelessness. Now, we who wait for your direction have thought it two ways to do this. First, we will make these Mansoulians as vile as we can. Then, when you join us at the appointed time, you'll be able to fall upon them with the greatest force. And all of the nations awaiting your call, we think an army of doubters would most likely be able to attack and overcome the town of Mansoul with success. With this plan, we shall overcome these enemies. Otherwise, the pit shall open and desperation shall thrust them into it. We've already embedded 3 of our trusted diablins among them. Covetousness, lasciviousness, and anger are wearing disguises and have changed their names, and they are now accepted by the Mansoulians. The name of covetousness has been changed to Prudent Thrifty, and he has been hired by Mr. Mind, who has become almost as bad as our friend. Lasciviousness has changed his name to Harmless Mirth, and he now serves as Lord Wilbywill's lackey. He has made his master very self-indulgent. Anger changed his name to Good Zeal, and was invited to live with godly fear. But that irritable old gentleman was suspicious and kicked our companion out of his house. Since that time, Anger informed us that if he hadn't run away from the old man, his master would have hanged him for what he had done. These 3 have helped move our work forward in Mansoul, for even with the spite and quarrelsome temper of the old gentleman, the other 2 diablins have applied their efforts and are likely to have their work bring results. As we see it, the next step in this project is for you to come against the town on a market day while the town is caught up in the heat of business. And when they are consumed with such affairs, they will feel most secure and least expect an assault will be made upon them. They will also be less able to defend themselves or to displease you as you put our plan into action. Now, when you make your furious assault outside the gates, we, your trusted and beloved ones, shall be ready to help from within. So, in all likelihood, we will be able to put man's soul into total confusion and swallow them up before they realize what's going on. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. James 3:16. Our highly esteemed lords and most elusive dragons, if your serpentine heads can find a better way than this, let us know what is on your minds. We send this to the monsters of the infernal cave from the house of Mr. Mischief and Mansoul by the hand of Mr. Profane. While the raging rebels and hellish diablins planned the ruin of the town of Mansoul, the town fell into a sad and miserable state. This was partly because they had offended Shaddai and his son, and partly because their enemies had renewed their strength with him. The many unanswered petitions sent to Prince Emmanuel and his father Shaddai asking for their pardon and favor added to their despondency. Through the craft and slyness of the domestic diablins, the cloud hanging over Mansoul grew blacker and blacker, and their Emmanuel seemed to stand even farther away. The sickness still raged in Mansoul, both among the captains and the inhabitants of the town, but their enemies remained lively and strong. If things continued in this way, the Diablins were likely to become the head, while Mansoul became the tail. The letter written by the Diablins, who still lurked in the town of Mansoul, was on its way to be delivered to Diablos by the hand of Mr. Profane. He sits in the lurking places of the villages. In the hiding places he kills the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the unfortunate. Psalm chapter 10, verse 8. He planned to carry the letter past Hellgate Hill and deliver it to Cerberus to place into the hand of his lord. But when Cerberus and Profane met, since both were about as distinguished as beggars, they fell into a conversation about Mansoul and the plans against her. Old friend, Cerberus said in greeting, you've come to Hellgate Hill again? I'm glad to see you. The wicked Profane, feeling important, returned the greeting and said, yes, I've come again about the concerns of the town of Mansoul. He showed the letter to Cerberus, who took it from his hand. The two stood at the gate talking. Please do tell me about that town of Mansoul, and what condition is it in? Cerberus said. For us, the lords of this place, is in a magnificent condition, Profane began. As to godliness, I believe they have deteriorated. That's about the best we can wish for. And their lord is out of sorts with them, and that pleases us well. We have access to some of their homes, for our Diablin friends have gained their acceptance. What more do we need to become masters of the place? Our trusted friends plot daily to betray the lords of this town. The sickness continues to rage bitterly among them. When you add it all up, we hope to prevail in the end. The dog of Hellgate agreed. He said, there's no better time than this to assault them. I wish the plan would be put into practice and the desired success achieved soon. I wish it for the sake of poor Diablins who live in continual fear of their lives in that traitorous Mansoul. Devising of the plan is almost finished, Profane said. The lords of Mansoul, who are Diablins, are working at it day and night, while the Mansoulians are still silly doves. He lurks in a hiding place as a lion in his lair. He lurks to catch the afflicted. He catches the afflicted when he draws him into his net. He crouches, he bows down, and the unfortunate fall by his mighty ones. Psalm chapter 10, 9 through 10. They cannot see what is going on around them. They need understanding to be concerned with their state and recognize ruin is at hand. You can't help but conclude Diablos will prevail if he moves quickly. Cerberus agreed. You can say that again. I am glad things are at this point. He gestured with his head toward the den beyond Hellgate. I have sent your letter in already. Go in to my lords, my brave Profane, and they will welcome you as a bearer of good news, which the whole kingdom will send forth. Profane walked into the den. His lord Diablo stepped from the shadows and greeted him. Welcome, my trusty servant. Your letter has made me very happy. The rest of the lords of the pit greeted him in a similar manner, and after Profane bowed low and paid homage to them all, he said, let Mansoul be given to my lord Diablos, and let him be her king forever. In response to the hollow belly and yawning gorge of hell, issued a loud, hideous groan, for that was the music of that place. The mountains trembled as if they would crumble and fall into pieces. After the monsters of the infernal cave read and reflected on what the letter said, they talked about how to reply. The first to speak his opinion was Lucifer. He said the initial project of the Diabolins in man's soul is likely to meet with good success, as they can make man's soul even more vile and filthy. There is no better way to destroy a soul than this. Our old friend Balaam did this and prospered many years ago. Forsaking the right way, they have gone astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 15. As a general rule for Diabolins in all ages, let this bolster our confidence to attain the greatest number of souls possible. For nothing can make this approach fail except grace, of which I hope this town has no share. To the praise of the glory of his grace, which he freely bestowed on us in the Beloved. In him we have redemption, through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace. Ephesians chapter 1, 6-7. However, whether or not to attack them on a market day because they would be hindered while doing business, that I think should be under debate. This approach should be debated because it is essential to the success of our plan. If we don't time it well, our plan may fail. Our friends, the Diabolins, say a market day is best because man's soul will be busiest then and won't be thinking of a surprise attack. But what if they happen to double their guards on those days? Nature and reason would teach them much such steps should be taken on market day. And what if they keep watch on those days as their current circumstances require? Think about it. What if their men are always armed on those days? If such is the case, you, my lords, may be disappointed in your attempts, and may even place our friends in the town in danger of unavoidable ruin. The great Beelzebub stood, flickering firelight danced across his hideous reptilian features. My lord has made a good point, but his speculation may or may not come about, nor has he explained what must be surrendered again. I know he said that we did what he did to provoke a heated debate about the topic. With that in mind, we must learn whether the town of Mansoul has a sense or knowledge of her decayed state or not. Does she know anything of the plan we have? Does she realize we already have admission to her? If she has such knowledge, it would rouse her to set a watch guard at her gates and to double the security on market days. But if after we look into it we find they are asleep and unaware regarding our actions, then in my judgment any day will do, but a market day would be best. Diablos tapped his claw finger against his pointed chin as he pondered what had been said. How would we know this? A voice among the group called out, Ask Mr. Profane. He lives there and will know of such goings on. So Profane was called in and asked the question. Profane felt quite important as his lords looked to him for vital information. My lords, he said, as far as I can gather at this time, the condition of the town of Mansoul is that their faith and love has dwindled. But I have this against you, that you have left your first love. Revelation chapter 2, verse 4. They haven't made much of an attempt to correct or amend their lives, and Emmanuel, their prince, has turned his back on them. They send petitions asking him to come to them again and again, but he has not responded to the request in a timely manner. Diablo smiled broadly, showing his nasty, jagged teeth. I am glad to hear they have backslidden in this way, but I'm still troubled by their petitioning of Emmanuel. However, their loose living is a sign that there isn't much heart in these efforts, and if the heart isn't involved, such things are of little value. But go on with what you have to say. I won't distract you any further. Beelzebub closed his ideas in the matter. If man's soul's condition is as Profane has described it to us, it won't matter what day we assault it, because their prayers and even their power will do them little good. But your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. Isaiah 59:2. When Beelzebub finished presenting his opinion, Apollyon followed with his insights. He said, My opinion concerning this matter is that we move forward, but without force, not doing things in a hurry. Let our friends in Mansoul go on with their work, polluting and defiling her by seeking to draw her further into sin. There is nothing like sin to devour man's soul. If this is done and it takes effect, Mansell will forget about sending further petitions. In fact, she won't do anything to increase her security and safety, for she will forget her Emmanuel and will not desire his company. If she can be drawn into living this way, her prince won't hurry to her aid. Our trusted friend, Colonel Security, drove him out of town with one of his tricks. Remembering this, I ask, why wouldn't Lord Covetousness and Lord Lasciviousness keep him out of the town by what they do? I tell you this, not that you don't already know it, but 2 or 3 diablins working from the inside, if retained and supported by the town of Mansell, will do more toward keeping Emmanuel from them I said that again. Let me just start that over. I tell you this, not that you don't already know it, but 2 or 3 diablins working from the inside, if retained and supported by the town of Mansell, will do more toward keeping Emmanuel from them and toward making the town of Mansell your own than a legion sent out from us to oppose him could accomplish. Therefore, let this first segment of the project our friends in Mansell have begun be carried on with all cunning and craft imaginable. Let them send more of their men to practice deception among the people of Mansell, while living under one disguise or another. If we follow this method, we won't need to rush upon them to make war. If it does become a necessity, the more sinful they are, the more unable they will be able to resist us, and the easier it will be for us to overcome them. If you look at it from the worst case scenario, that Emmanuel actually comes to them again, wouldn't this same approach likely drive him away from them once more? When he sees how they have slipped into sin again, why wouldn't their actions drive him from them forever? For the same reason which he was driven from them in the first place. And if this happens, he'll go away with his battering rams, slings, and his captains and soldiers. This would leave Mansell naked and bare. When the town sees she's utterly forsaken by her prince, don't you think she'll open her gates to you again of her own accord? For my enemies have spoken against me, and those who watch for my life have consulted together, saying, God has forsaken him. Pursue and seize him, for there is no one to deliver him. Psalm 71, verses 10 through 11. Don't you think she will restore you to the place you held in the days of old? But this will be accomplished over time. It's going to take more than a few days to cause such a great work as this to take place. As soon as Apollyon finished speaking, Diablo spewed his own malice and pleaded his cause. He said, My lords and powers of the cave, my true and trusted friends, I have listened to your long and tedious orations, and with much impatience. Now I ask that you listen to me. My hunger and thirst are unquenchable, and I lust after a repossession of my famous town of Mansell. Whatever the outcome, I can't wait any longer to see how things turn out as we drag out our plans. Without further delay, I must seek by all the means at my disposal to fill my insatiable chasm with the soul and body of the town of Mansell. Therefore, I ask that you lend me your heads, hearts, and your help, for I am going to recover my town of Mansell now. He pounded his clenched fist to emphasize his point. When the lords and princes of the pit saw the flaming desire within Diablos to devour the miserable town of Mansell, they decided not to raise any more objections, even though they knew that if they had followed Apollion's advice, they would have distressed the town of Mansell far more fearfully. Instead, they consented to lend him what strength they could, just in case they might need him in the future for one of their own schemes. So they moved on to the next subject to be discussed, namely, how many soldiers they had that could join with Diablos when he went up against the town of Mansell to take it. And that ends that reading. We'll pick up later or tomorrow or something in chapter 22, brothers and sisters. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. I am going to begin reading Code Word Babylon out of book 2, starting in chapter 22. I did not realize I never finished this book, so I need to finish it. Thank y'all. Bye-bye.